There really are a ton of platforms to stream your music online these days. And I think knowing the different audiences they serve and their own strengths and weaknesses is really crucial to being able to get the most out of streaming your music online. Of course, we got to start with the big one, which has sort of increasingly stood out from its competitors, which is Spotify. Spotify has a huge listener base. It's increasingly the way a lot of people, just listen to music on a day-to-day basis and also discover new music. In that respect, Spotify's Discover playlists have now, gained the ability to, I think, break artists in the way that a good review could in the past in a blog or in a music paper. So Spotify is definitely a significant streaming platform right now. The downside of Spotify is that, as many know, the revenues that you get per play are not terribly high. So I think for a lot of artists, Spotify ends up being a tool for exposure and discoverability. But as always, it's challenging to turn potential listeners into actual ones. There are plenty of other streaming platforms as well. In fact, all of the big tech companies sort of have their own service. Apple Music, Amazon, Google. There's of course also Tidal and Deezer are two other examples. And all of these platforms have sort of different payment models, different revenue models for artists. For example, Tidal boasts of being better than Spotify. That was actually some of their big sort of marketing pitch when they first launched the platform. But overall, revenues through streaming tend to be quite low. So for it to really be, I think, worthwhile, it has to be for artists who have a fairly significant listener base already. There are also, of course, platforms that are geared towards specific styles of music. I'm thinking of Idagio and Primephonic for classical music. There is, of course, Jazzed for, unsurprisingly, jazz music fans. And I think the main appeal of these sorts of platforms is not more content, but less content. There's less content that listeners who wouldn't be interested in it just don't have to sit through. And then there is also, sort of exclusive content. But on the other hand, all of the big platforms like Spotify have really deep catalogs of music across all genres. So you don't necessarily need to go to a specialist platform if you're not so inclined. Many of these platforms have listener bases that overlap between them, but I think most people sort of choose one or two based on a variety of factors. The price, of course, the audio quality is another one, the variety of music available, the availability of certain exclusive music, and of course technological factors like compatibility or integration with a smartphone, a tablet, what have you. As an artist, you may decide you want to focus mainly on just one or two of these platforms, or you may decide that you want to be on all of them. Of course, you have a chance of reaching a greater audience that way, but it does require more work in actually submitting your music to all of those different platforms. There are services that can do it on your behalf, but of course, those services aren't free. They charge money for that, and that takes away from the revenues that you're getting for streaming, so you would have to hope that your streaming revenues would be significant enough for it to be worthwhile. There are also platforms that offer a hybrid take on streaming. I'm thinking of Bandcamp, for example, where you can stream songs and albums, but you can also have paid downloads. You can sell physical copies of your music. You can even sell merch like t-shirts or tote bags or what have you. Of course, this is only touching on audio. Streaming video is increasingly important as well. And there's a number of big platforms that we should look at in that respect. The biggest is probably YouTube, which I think most people know as a sort of just general video site. YouTube is big for music, though. I think after Spotify, it's one of the ways that a lot of people engage with new music and discover new artists. And sort of in a similar sense, TikTok, which is maybe more of a social media network, also I think is increasingly one of the most important ways of connecting with young listeners while sharing video content. and is definitely not something that should be overlooked. The major platforms tend to be sort of oriented towards a more general audience, but there are some music-specific platforms available as well. For example, there is Medici.tv, which does recordings of classical music performances, also does live streaming of some classical music performances, and also a newer option just within the last few months is earlymusic.tv as well. So a smaller music-focused platform might not have the same audience as a YouTube, for example. It might not have the same brand recognition, but it can make it easier for listeners to find your music when they're sort of just browsing other content on the website. There are also platforms that are geared more towards live music performances. Again, there's sort of more general ones like Twitch, YouTube, again. Of course, all of the main social media networks like Facebook and Instagram offer live video streaming as well. You can even do it via Zoom. But there are also sort of music-specific ones that are worth looking into. And two that come to mind are Stage It and Street Jelly, which are definitely worth checking out. So whatever approach you decide to take with streaming, I think the one thing we can't deny is that streaming is here to stay. And I think that it would be wise for artists to sort of find a way that works for them to engage with at least a couple of these platforms, to get their music out there, to find an audience and to generate a bit of revenue.
So when do you put your music online? So there's two kind of ways you can put your music online. If you're doing a show, the best thing to look at is your target market, or what's your analytics on Facebook or on your audience. Where are they? So just make sure that you're in the good time zone for your show, because if your audience is in another time zone, that's pretty important for you to plan it and to plan an hour that is good for all the time zones that you need to reach your audience. So that's one of the main things you need to know. Also, you can look at when they are mainly online. So if you look at your analytics, normally you will see when you have more activities online when you publish something. So if you look at that, that may give you a clue on when you should do a show in terms of which day of the week you need to do a show. So for the entire show part, that would be the best clues you can get to know exactly when you need to release your music. In terms of your recordings themselves, if you're releasing your recordings, one of the first things you need to plan is how you do your releases. So if you're a new artist, normally you should try to kind of start with a single or an EP before an album, just to let people know a little bit more about you before you release the entire thing. If you already have a career that is ongoing, so just plan your releases that they make sense in terms of your activities. You need to think that now, because people are more online and they have more things to watch, you need to release more often your recordings, so they are always aware that there's something going on with you. When you want to release a recording, it's really important to have everything. So the music, the information with your music, and your cover art, at least 5 weeks before. And that one of the things that is really important for you to know is that normally releases are on Friday. That's the day when Spotify or Apple Music are putting their new releases of the week. So you want to be there on Friday every time you release something. So should you use your own website or a platform to broadcast your material? So you can use both. Of course, your website is the place to go for your fans, and you want them to come to your website because that's where everything there is to know about you and where they can share with you some information or write to you. The best place is your website. You can also collect some analytics data from the people that are coming to see your website, what country, where they are, what languages they speak. So that's a way to have more information on your audience afterwards. So you can use the platforms just as a way to broadcast easily all the videos you have, for example. So you can use YouTube or Vimeo. So you will have all your material broadcasted on their platform. But if you look really into them, you can see that there's an embed part that you can do. So when you can share your video, you can click on embed, and there you'll have a string of code that you can put on your website, and so the YouTube video is going to be on your website. So there you're winning both ways. So you're getting the public and the audience from the platform, and you're also sharing your content to your fans through your website. If you're an independent artist, you're doing everything by yourself. So a great way to reach an audience and get this audience to think that your material is of quality is to go through curated sites or curated platforms to broadcast your music. So at 10 or 20 years ago, you would sign with a label, and normally a label would give you that kind of quality insurance. So many fans or audience would follow a specific label because they would be sure that the artist there is a good artist, and they're going to be curious even if they don't know them because they're related to that label. So now, because there's less label and more independent artists, curated sites are kind of doing the same thing. So whether it's a site for shows, whether it's a curated playlist on Spotify, it gives the same incentive to an audience that they're sure that what they're listening to is good music at the end. And so there's a good chance for you, if you're associated with one of these curated playlists or platforms, to be more known, and you also have the kind of quality stamp with it. So CD Baby, TuneCore, DistroKid, and so many, what are they? They are what we call aggregators, or maybe digital distributors. So what's the difference between them and what do they do? Normally what they're doing is kind of the same thing as your distributor was doing when they were putting physical CDs in stores. The only difference is they're putting it online. So every song that you're sending through these aggregators or distributors are kind of encoding the song with all the information that is needed on the platforms. So we know what's the title, what's the artist, and what's the information for the payables after, so you get revenue. So there's no way for an independent artist to actually go on Apple Music or on Spotify by themselves because every platform has a different way of encoding the music and the information with it. So that's why you always need a distributor or an aggregator to put your music out there. The difference between a distributor and an aggregator is a digital distributor normally only takes a percentage, and they're doing promotion on it. You don't have to pay anything up front. When you're using an aggregator, normally you pay up front, and they take a very small percentage or not at all. So that's the difference between both ways of distributing your music online.
So SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's basically a whole bunch of ways that help your online content, whether that's your website or your social media, other things that you've posted, that helps them be easier to find on search engines like Google. I think the importance of SEO is obvious. If somebody searches for your name, you want to make sure that you're one of the first search results and not somebody else with the same name. But it really goes beyond that as well. You want to find strategies that help it so that when somebody searches for musicians in your city, musicians who play your same style of music, or even the same instrument as you, that your name shows up in those results as well and really helps to people to discover you online. So there are two main ways that search engines find your content, and it's both sort of written content and that's actually on your website, but also through the metadata that is under the surface of your site. So you can go about that simply by organically incorporating words and phrases that would hit a lot of search results into the text on your page. But you can also and should also do it through the metadata on your site. Metadata basically meaning data about other data. So it's the data that tells web browsers and search engines like Google what kind of content is actually found in your site. You can of course do this manually by writing the code of your site yourself, but I would say that every good web design tool these days like Squarespace or Wix will give you really straightforward and approachable ways of incorporating good metadata into your website. But of course, there are levels of search engine optimization as well. It's one thing to know that you're supposed to put a bunch of words in the code of your website. It's another thing entirely to know what exactly to put there. This is a reason people get paid good money to do this thing as digital marketers. And of course, you can't just go the opposite direction and think that you can put every word in the dictionary in your metadata, because search engines will sort of filter out any sites that they see that have excessive or incoherent metadata. But the good news is that there really are a ton of tools and resources available online to help you get to grips with SEO and really to help you get started in a pretty straightforward way. I would suggest as a starting point for yourselves to maybe just start by creating a list of key terms that describe you, describe what you do, and then also trying to have some words that maybe coincide with other frequently searched terms that fit your milieu.
So what is metadata? That big word that everyone is kind of clueless about in the music industry. This is pretty simple. So metadata is the data that is related to another data. So since your MP3 or your WAV file or even your video file is now a data in itself, you need metadata to describe it. So metadata actually is kind of simple. It's your credits. So you don't have any booklet anymore, and everything you need to know about an album or a track or even a video are the credits of it. So that's the main metadata that you need to have everywhere you can on the web, and that's the way to track every one of your recordings. The other part of the metadata that you need to have is that you have some ID numbers that are pretty interesting and that are mainly to recognize the files that you have, whether it's your recording, the album, or even yourself as an artist. So you will have some really specific numbers that you will be able to find, whether it's, for example, for your album, it's the UPC, that is your barcode behind your album. So now you only have the number because you're on the web. If you have a track, normally you have an ISRC. And you have many other metadata that you can see that you can relate to your recordings at all. That's really important to know, that metadata is really only for describing your recordings. When we talk about users' data, whether it's your analytics on your socials, on your Spotify for artists, then that's really the information about your audience, and you know more about your audience and the way they interact with your music. So there are two separate things. So since your metadata is mainly your credits, it really have an impact on your SEO. So whether it's in Google, Wikidata, or Wikipedia, or even in Spotify or Apple, every credit information for your recording is somehow a research possibility from a user. So that's really important for you to put all the information you have, so when they do a research, they can find you better. The other thing that is really important for you is maybe right now you're playing with a musician which is one of your friends, but he's not known already. But maybe in 10 years, he or she will be known. So if someone search for them, that would be a good idea that they come and search for it and they just find your recording. So every data that you can put with your recording is a good thing, so you have better SEO. More is better than less.
Should you create a Wikidata entry? I would say yes, but it depends. And I think it depends on other things that might be a bigger priority for you if you don't have them already, like a Facebook profile, a professional artist website, various other social media profiles. Wikidata can be a really great tool for increasing your discoverability online, but of course there has to be content online for people to discover. So you want to make sure that that's up there before you start getting involved with Wikidata. The other thing we should be clear about is that there is a slightly steeper learning curve with Wikidata compared to some other sort of online promotion tools. But I think as long as you're willing to put the time in, it's not too much to get to grips with. And there's a lot of really good resources online that I think can get you started with the fundamentals. One really useful resource that I want to recommend in particular is a recent webinar series offered on Wikidata by Capacoa and the Conseil Québécois du Théâtre. So this is sort of a 9-part series on Wikidata for artists that they've been offering. The last session is taking place in March of 2021, but you can go and catch up on the pre-recorded lessons from previous sessions available in French and English. That are really good, that'll introduce you to the basic topics, but also take you to sort of more advanced considerations, specifically for the performing arts. And I think this is a really great starting point for anybody who's interested in learning more about Wikidata.
What is an ISRC? So an ISRC is really the barcode of your song. So each song needs to have an ISRC. It's the ID number that will be used everywhere to track your song, whether it's on Spotify or on the radio. So an ISRC is a 12-digit code. And it's structured with, first you have the country where you have the ISRC. So if you're in Canada, normally it should start with CA. And then after, you have 3 digits, letters and or numbers, and that's the master zoner's specific code. So the master zoner need to get that specific code to by calling, whether it's to SUPROC here in Canada or Connect here in Canada also. So these are the 2 societies that are delivering the 3-digit codes that you need to have as a master zoner. And then you always use this 3-digit codes in every one of your ISRC for all the recordings that you own the master. And after that 3-digit codes, you have to write the year of the recording itself. And then the next numbers are the numbers that you can add, whether it's the product number or the track number. So the entire 12 digits are used everywhere afterwards, so they can collect the money and ID'd really the song everywhere it's published, broadcast, or where they can create revenue. So for example, if you put an album on iTunes and you decide to release a track before, so you have a single and you're releasing the single before the album, normally you will get the ISRC of your album. And when you're going to release the album, the person that already bought your song will be able to complete the album, so they won't have to pay twice for the same song. And the only way they know that it's the same song is the ISRC. The same thing appears, for example, when you put your song on Spotify or any other streaming services. So if you're on a playlist, the only way that your song is going to get back on the playlist if you change distributor or an aggregator is the ISRC. So that's why this is really an ID that you need to keep on your side for each track that you have, and you always use the same. Each time you do a special edit or a new recording of the same song, you need to have an ISRC that is a different one. So if you do a remix, a radio edit, or any other kind of variation of the recording itself, you need to have a new ISRC. Also, for a music video, you need to have a different ISRC because it's the music with the video itself and the image is moving. So the ISWC is not an ID for the recording like the ISRC, but it's a number and an ID for the work. So that's really the ID of the song itself or the composition itself. If you want to see or find the ISWC of one of your songs, when you declare your song and you enter it on SOCAN, normally about a month later, if you go back, you will see that there is the ISWC there, and that is the ID number of your work. So when you put your song and you deliver it as a master owner and it's your own song, normally when you're going to deliver it to the platforms and you're going to enter it through the distributor's platform, you will see that the ISWC is normally asked. And if you have it, the best thing you can do is put it there. So then that's the way to make sure that the composition, so the publishing side, will get the revenue and you will get the revenue for the master side.
Do you need to have your own website, Facebook profile, other social media presence, VIMEO, etc.? For most artists, my answer would be an emphatic yes. I think in the past, for artists who had a strong local following, it maybe would not have been as important, but I do think that COVID-19 shows one way in which this is an increasingly risky strategy. The more difficult question is how many of these should I pick and which ones? And in this sense, you need to be strategic, I think, because obviously each one represents a chance to reach a greater audience, but your time and your resources are limited. You can't, manage them all to a high quality unless you pay someone to do that on your behalf. You also want to make sure that they're all updated regularly. In fact, an out-of-date website can give the wrong impression that you're maybe not up to much these days and can actually end up costing you potential listeners. So you're really better off picking the amount of platforms or websites that you feel like you can manage and then trying to make the most of them from there. So I would suggest trying to keep a rough schedule for all of the different sites you're trying to manage and sticking to it. So for your personal website, you want to make sure that all of your most recent activities are on there so people have a good sense of what you've been up to and what you have coming up soon. You'll also, of course, want to make sure that your artist bio is kept up to date. For other platforms, you'll want to keep those updated, if not daily, then close to it. For something like Instagram, which moves pretty quickly, you'll want to make sure that there's enough of your content on there for your followers to be able to engage with it so it doesn't just get lost in their timeline. For platforms like YouTube or Vimeo, obviously, high quality video production does take time. It takes time for your viewers to digest. So I think a good idea of sharing something every week or every 2 weeks is a pretty reasonable approach. You'll also want to make sure that the content you're sharing is appropriate for a given platform. You know, what works best on one doesn't necessarily work as well on the other. So you want to sort of analyze that when you're developing your content. Try to keep in mind the strengths of each. For example, being able to share links on Instagram doesn't work so well. That's a major headache. So you definitely want to keep your posts, the content on the platform as opposed to directing people elsewhere. You could use Facebook for that instead. Whatever approach you do decide to take, I think the most important thing to remember is that the key is trying to grow your followers organically and get them to engage with your content organically. It can be a slow process, but really having 10 followers who really support your work, who really like what you do, and are actively following your work, I think that's much better than having 100 followers who are basically just people who don't really know you and who followed you just hoping that you'd follow them back. So I would say be patient and put the time in, and good things will come.
To get consent to add someone to your email list, you need to expressly ask for permission. The Canada Anti-Spam legislation dictates that when sending emails for a business purpose, you need to clearly state who the email is from or who it is being sent on behalf of, how the person you're sending it to can contact who has sent the email, and how they can unsubscribe to your email list. The best way to get consent to add someone to your email list, if you have a website, if you have a form, have them check a box that says, yes, I consent to receiving emails from your business. Or if you're at a live event, you could have a sign-up sheet where they're expressly providing their name and email address. To get your music into films, television, video games, and other productions, you need to make sure that the public is aware your music is available to be licensed. If you have a website where your music is found, indicate an email address that people can contact if they want to license your music. If you're working with a publisher, they will take the role of ensuring that your music can get into other productions. Speaking to music supervisors, they're often involved in putting music into films and television. And otherwise, network. Speak to people in the industry, let them know you're available to license your music. A music supervisor is someone who works on an audiovisual production, curating the music that will be included in that production. A production music library will consist of many tracks of music, compositions, and master recordings. They're usually owned and controlled by music publishers who make them available to producers to license for their films, televisions, video games, and other audiovisual productions.
Many artists are asking, why bother asking for money when the amount per click is so low in terms of revenue in music? So there's many ways to see it. The first thing you have to see it for shows, for example, is that there's the perceived value of your music and your art. If you never ask anything for it, the perceived value of the customer will be very low for it. Even though your art is accessible on the web everywhere, when you ask for an online ticket for a show, some money, at least the customer sees that there's value to it and there's value to your art. In terms of the streaming part, you need to be aware that there's really low amount per click that is paid to artists, but at the same time, it's just that the revenue is differently shared. So, for example, when you were selling CDs, you had to sell in the first 3 months a lot of CDs to keep having your CD in stores. Now with the streaming revenue, your song is always there. So you need to see it as a long-term revenue rather than a short-term revenue. So that's why the amount is a little low, but at the end, you can make a lot more money. Sometimes it's good to give, whether it's a music video or some tracks for free. And that's because you can reach a wider audience that you don't know already, and that they don't know you also. So sometimes you can just see what's the value in it. If you want to give something for free, do you think you're going to reach out a lot more people that don't know you yet? Or you're just going to give free things to people who already know and like you? So the first part is a good way to use freemium to have a better reach. And the other one, maybe you should charge a higher price or try to find a way to monetize them. In a music recording, there are 3 levels of rights. The first right is the work. So the work itself is really the lyrics and the music, and it can be performed in front of a live audience or performed on a recording, or it can even be written on charts. So that's really the works, and that's normally associated with publishing rights. You also have the master's rights. The master's rights is really the recording itself. So who paid for the studio recording? The performers, the engineers, and this is the person or the company that is the master's owner. So it's really related to the recording itself. And you also have the performer's rights, which is normally related to the master's owner's rights. Each right is represented by a collective society. So you normally have in Canada at least one collective society that is representing the publishing part, the master part, and there's another one for the performer's part. Music Data Exchange is a merge between CMRRA, which is a publishing collective society for publishing in Canada, and Sound Exchange, which is a collective society that is retrieving revenue for masters owners and publishers in the USA. So Music Data Exchange was really made to make possible the link between the publisher part and the masters owners part. So this way, for example, a label can look in Music Data Exchange to see who is the publisher and the author and composer of a song, to make sure they have the good credits and they pay the right license to them. And on the other side, the publisher is also having this information on which label is using his work to record a new recording with a new performer. So this way, every rights is linked together and everyone can have the fair share of their revenue related to the recording itself. Music Data Exchange is one initiative, but there's many other across the world, and there's even probably a few other ones that are going to come up in the next years, even here in Canada. So just be aware of all these kinds of services or societies or platforms that are there that can probably offer the same service as MDX.